Section 3 of The Adventures of Peter Cottontail by Thornton W. Burgess. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Jude Summers. Section 3. Reddy invites Peter Rabbit to take a walk. Peter Rabbit gets an early breakfast. And Reddy Fox gets a scare. Chapter 7. Reddy invites Peter Rabbit to take a walk. Old Granny Fox was not feeling well. For 3 days she had been unable to go out hunting, and for 3 days Reddy Fox had tried to find something to tempt Granny's appetite. To tempt Granny's appetite. He had brought in a tender young chicken from Farmer Brown's hen yard, and he had stolen a plump trout from Billy Mink's storehouse, but Granny had just turned up her nose. "What I need," said Granny Fox, "is a tender young rabbit." Now, Reddy Fox is very fond of Granny Fox, and when she said that she needed a tender young rabbit, Reddy made up his mind that he would get it for her, though how he was going to do it he didn't know. Dozens of times he had tried to catch Peter Rabbit, but every time Peter's long legs had taken him to a place of safety. "I'll just have to fool Peter Rabbit," said Reddy Fox, as he sat on his doorsteps and looked over the Green Meadows. Reddy Fox is very sly. He is so sly that it is hard work to be sure when he is honest and when he is playing a trick. As he sat on his doorsteps, looking across the Green Meadows, he saw the Merry Little Breezes coming his way. Reddy smiled to himself. When they got near enough, he shouted to them. "Will you do something for me?" he asked. "Of course we will," shouted the Merry Little Breezes, who are always delighted to do something for others. "I wish you would find Peter Rabbit and tell him that I have found a new bed of tender young carrots in Farmer Brown's garden, and invite him to go there with me tomorrow morning at sunup," said Reddy Fox. Away raced the Merry Little Breezes to find Peter Rabbit and give him the invitation of Reddy Fox. Pretty soon back they came to tell Reddy that Peter would be delighted to meet Reddy on the edge of the Old Briar-patch at sunup the next morning, and go with him to get some tender young carrots. Reddy smiled to himself, for now he was sure that he would get Peter Rabbit for Granny's breakfast. Early the next morning, just before sunup, Reddy Fox started down the Lone Little Path and hurried across the Green Meadows to the Old Briar-patch. Reddy was dressed in his very best suit of clothes, and very smart and handsome he looked. When he reached the Old Briar-patch, he could see nothing of Peter Rabbit. He waited and waited and waited, but still Peter Rabbit did not come. Finally he gave it up, and decided that he would go over and have a look at the young carrots in Farmer Brown's garden. When he got there, what do you think he saw? Why, all around that bed of tender young carrots were footprints, and the footprints were Peter Rabbit's. Reddy Fox ground his teeth and snarled wickedly, for he knew then that instead of fooling Peter Rabbit had fooled him. Just then up came one of the Merry Little Breezes of Old Mother West Wind. "Good morning, Reddy Fox," said the Merry Little Breeze. "Good morning," replied Reddy Fox, and if you could have seen him and heard him, you would never have suspected how ill-tempered he was feeling. "Peter Rabbit asked me to come and tell you that he is very sorry that he could not meet you at the briar-patch this morning, but he grew so hungry thinking of those tender young carrots that he just had to come and get some before sunup, and he is very much obliged to you for telling him about them. He says they are the finest young carrots that he has ever tasted," said the Merry Little Breeze. The heart of Reddy Fox was filled with rage, but he did not let the Merry Little Breeze know it. He just smiled and sent the Merry Little Breeze back to Peter Rabbit to tell him how glad he was that Peter enjoyed the carrots, and to invite Peter to meet him the next morning on the edge of the Old Briar-patch at sunup, to go with him to a patch of sweet clover, which he had just found near the old hickory tree. The Merry Little Breeze danced off with the message. Pretty soon he was back to say that Peter Rabbit would be delighted to go to the sweet clover patch the next morning. Reddy grinned as he trudged off home. "I'll be at the clover patch an hour before sunup tomorrow morning, and then we'll see," he said to himself. Chapter 8. Peter Rabbit Gets an Early Breakfast. Peter Rabbit crept out of his snug little bed in the middle of the Old Briar-patch 2 hours before sunup and hurried over to the big hickory tree. Sure enough, close by, he found a beautiful bed of sweet clover, just as Reddy Fox had said was there. Peter chuckled to himself as he ate and ate and ate until his little round stomach was so full that he could barely hop. When he had eaten all that he could, he hurried back to the Old Briar-patch to finish his morning nap, and all the time he kept chuckling to himself. You see, Peter was suspicious of Reddy Fox, and so he had gone over to the sweet clover bed alone 2 hours before sunup. Peter Rabbit had hardly left the sweet clover bed when Reddy Fox arrived. Reddy lay down in the long meadow grass and grinned to himself as he waited. Slowly the minutes went by, until up from behind the Purple Hills came a round, jolly, red Mr. Sun, but no Peter Rabbit. Reddy stopped grinning. "Perhaps," said he to himself, "Peter is waiting for me on the edge of the Old Briar-patch and wasn't going to try to fool me." So Reddy hurried over to the Old Briar-patch, and sure enough, there was Peter Rabbit sitting on the edge of it. When Peter saw him coming, he dodged in behind a big clump of friendly old brambles. Reddy came up with his broadest smile. "Good morning, Peter Rabbit," said Reddy. "Shall we go over to that sweet clover bed?" Peter put one hand over his mouth to hide a smile. "Oh," said he, "I was so dreadfully hungry for sweet clover that I couldn't wait until sunup, and so I went over 2 hours ago. I hope you will excuse me, Reddy Fox. I certainly do appreciate your kindness in telling me of that new sweet clover bed, and I hope I have not put you out." "Certainly not," replied Reddy Fox in his pleasantest manner. And you know, Reddy Fox can be very pleasant indeed when he wants to be. "It is a great pleasure to be able to give you pleasure. There is nothing I so like to do as to give pleasure to others. By the way, I have just heard that Farmer Brown has a new planting of young cabbage in the corner of his garden. Will you meet me here at sunup tomorrow morning to go over there?" "I will be delighted to. I will indeed," replied Peter Rabbit, and all the time he smiled to himself behind his hand. Reddy Fox bade Peter Rabbit good-bye in the pleasantest way you can imagine. Yet all the time, down in his heart, Reddy was so angry that he hardly knew what to do, for you see he had got to go back to Granny Fox without the tender young rabbit which he had promised her. "This time I will be there 2 hours before sunup, and then we'll see, Peter Rabbit, who is the smartest," said Reddy Fox to himself. Chapter 9. Reddy Fox Gets a Scare. Peter Rabbit looked up at the silvery moon and laughed out loud. Then he kicked up his heels and laughed again as he started out across the Green Meadows towards Farmer Brown's garden. You see, Peter was suspicious, very suspicious indeed, of Reddy Fox. So, as it was a beautiful night for a walk, he thought he would just run over to Farmer Brown's garden and see if he could find that bed of newly planted cabbage about which Reddy Fox had told him. So Peter hopped and skipped across the Green Meadows, singing as he went. "Hold, old Miss Moon, hold up your light. Show the way, show the way. The little stars are shining bright. Night folks all are out to play." When Peter Rabbit reached Farmer Brown's garden, he had no trouble in finding the new planting of cabbage. It was tender. It was good. My, how good it was! Peter started in to fill his little round stomach. He ate and ate and ate and ate. By and by, just when he thought he couldn't eat another mouthful, he happened to look over to a patch of moonlight. Just for a second, Peter's heart stopped beating. There was Reddy Fox coming straight over to the new cabbage bed. Peter Rabbit didn't know what to do. Reddy Fox hadn't seen him yet, but he would in a minute or two, unless Peter could hide. He was too far from the dear old briar-patch to run there. Peter looked this way and looked that way. Ha-ha! There lay Farmer Brown's boy's old straw hat, just where he had left it when the supper horn blew. Peter crawled under it. It covered him completely. Peter peeped out from under one edge. He saw Reddy Fox standing in the moonlight, looking at the bed of newly set cabbage. Reddy was smiling as if his thoughts were very pleasant. Peter shivered. He could just guess what Reddy was thinking, how he would gobble up Peter when once he got him away from the safety of the old briar-patch. The thought made Peter so indignant that he forgot that he was hiding, and he sat up on his hind legs. Of course, he lifted the straw hat with him. Then he remembered and sat down again in a hurry. Of course, the straw hat went down quite as quickly. Presently, Peter peeped out. Reddy Fox was staring and staring at the old straw hat, and he wasn't smiling now. He actually looked frightened. It gave Peter an idea. He made 3 long hops straight towards Reddy Fox, all the time keeping the old straw hat over him. Of course, the hat went along with him, and because it covered Peter all up, it looked for all the world as if the hat was alive. Reddy Fox gave one more long look at the strange thing coming towards him through the cabbage bed, and then he started for home as fast as he could go, his tail between his legs. Peter Rabbit just lay down right where he was and laughed and laughed and laughed, and it almost seemed as if the old straw hat laughed too. End of section 3.